Good morning.
Oh, hello.
Good morning, Jane. Test. Can you hear me?
Yes, Jam, I can hear you.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome. It's now 9:30 and time for me to open this hearing session on Matter 21 and the West Area allocations. For those of you who haven't met us, I'm Caroline Malloy, and this is Dr. Rachel Bust, and we're the inspectors jointly appointed to hold the examination of the Lewisham local plan. Just before we get started, can everyone hear me okay? Just to remind everyone, please, to make sure that your mobile phones and any other devices are switched off or on silent while the hearing session is in session. We don't want any disturbance from phones going off. Also, just to ensure that your devices are kept away from your microphone because it can result in some interference. And also make sure that your microphone is muted if you're not talking, just to make sure that everyone can be heard properly, bearing in mind that we are being live streamed. From experience so far, you do need to sit quite close to the microphones to ensure that full audibility is achieved. Again, this is very important as we are being live streamed. Just to check, does anyone have any objection to the sessions being live streamed? Could the council please remind us about the usual housekeeping rules such as fire alarms, etc.?
Yes, thank you. The testing of the fire alarm has already been, so if the fire alarm goes off, it will be a real fire alarm and we have to vacate the building. The exits are clearly signposted. Our rendezvous point is next to Costa Coffee on the Broadway. Hopefully everyone knows where that is. Toilet facilities out the door to the left, and then there's refreshments across the seating area.
Thank you. The hearing session today will take the form of a structured discussion, which we shall lead based on the agenda and matters, issues and questions before us. Does everyone have sight of the agenda before we get started? Do you have access to an electronic version? I think Mr. Kemp is going to get a paper copy for you. I'll just carry on while he's doing that. So we will try and bring you in at the relevant point of the discussion, but if you do wish to speak, just put your nameplate up on Edge. I think a number of you have been here before, so you'll be aware of the process. Just to point out that we have read all of the representations made at the Regulation 19 stage, and to remind participants that you should have put all of your evidence in your original representations, and that the hearing sessions are not an opportunity to submit anything further. If you do stray into other areas, we'll have to rein you back in. So any points that you do make during the hearing session should relate to your original representations. And just a reminder to please respect others and allow people to speak and finish their points, and that questions should come through us rather than directly to the participants across the table. This morning's session will run from 9:30 to 1, with a short break in between for comfort break. So hopefully we'll finish on time at 1 o'clock. Does anyone have any questions at this stage about the hearing session? Just before we move on, just to check with the council, are there any outstanding matters or issues arising from previous sessions you'd like to raise at this point?
None, thank you.
Just to say a few words about how the site allocation sessions are going to work. We will be testing the deliverability of sites in these sessions against the NPPF and PPG definitions of deliverable and developable. The council is keeping a housing trajectory which is being updated live, if you like, and that will feed into the discussion in terms of housing land supply at tomorrow's session. So as we go through each of the sites, the council will be updating the trajectory. So we'll have the most up-to-date position on housing land supply at tomorrow's session. And hopefully that will make the session go smoothly tomorrow. So if there aren't any further points, can I ask participants for today's session to introduce themselves, starting with the council, please?
Thank you. David Syme, I'm the Head of Strategic Planning at Lewisham.
Angela Stewart, Principal Policy Officer at Lewisham.
Good morning, I'm Karol Jakubczyk. I'm the Planning Policy Manager here at Lewisham.
Good morning, Jan Morrison, Sydenham Hill Residents.
Pat Trembath, Sydenham Hill resident.
Could you just repeat your name there? I didn't quite catch your name.
Pat Trembath, Trembath.
Paula Carney from Carney Sweeney, representing Kitewood, who have land interests at Willow Way, Elsis.
Okay, thank you. As with previous sessions, we're going to start with a discussion in terms of the overall vision and objectives for the West area. And starting with the vision and key spatial objectives, we don't have any specific questions about those. But I am aware that Sydenham Hill residents had matters they'd like to raise, so I shall hand over to you.
Thank you. In the council's recent submission on this particular topic, they have emphasised the reliance on the characterisation study, which was done in 2019, and they state very strongly that it is robust. I would like to say that we have queried that. We find it imperfect, in particular in relation to Sydenham Hill, which, for those who don't know, is at the southwest tip of Lewisham. It runs from virtually the Crystal Palace aerial to the Horniman Museum, and it is an area of historic importance for the Great North Wood. It's also the tallest point in South London at 112 metres above sea level. There is one photograph in the characterisation study that just about shows it. It's very, very faint, and it's a thumbnail one. But if you want to look, it's page 154, and it's the view down Bellingham Road towards the ridge. I've also submitted to the hearing a slightly larger picture taken from another vantage point, showing how the ridge is tree-lined, pretty level in terms of there's nothing at the moment built through the tree line, and showing the Crystal Palace aerial. In talking to the authors of the characterisation study some years back, when the consultation period was originally started, they acknowledged that it was largely a desktop exercise. And the photographs related to Sydenham Hill on page 179 do not reflect the ridge. Some of them, funnily enough, are taken from points in Southwark and show points in Southwark, which is on the other side of the ridge. Those that are in Lewisham are in what I would call the foothills of Sydenham Hill. In other words, pretty low down compared with the main ridge. However, if we acknowledge that it is perhaps imperfect, but would still form a suitable basis for planning decisions on Sydenham Hill Ridge, I would like to just raise the point that the recommendations in the characterisation study have not really been carried through into the local plan. And if you will bear with me while I just very quickly read out the 6 bullet points. The issues are: protect the diversity of landscape and woodland that characterises the area's streets and verges from use as car parking. Protect and unify the diverse character and development typologies in this area. If you are needing it, it's page 178 in the characterisation study. Under opportunities, further promote the very strong sense of woodland character in this area. Explore opportunities for street trees, suds, and new greenways to enhance this character. As an area of special character, its architectural and townscape merit and local distinctiveness can be better protected, and views of landmarks, up, down roads, and panoramas are an important contributor to its character and could be enhanced. You may have noticed the slightly wry tone I took when I read out area of special character, because we were assured in matter 11 that there was no such thing in Lewisham. We would really appreciate it if the council would bear in mind those recommendations, which, as I say, have not found their way into the main plan as far as we can see. And in particular, there is also a recommendation to look at it from a conservation point of view. And I know the council intends to do that in 2025. In the meantime, planning decisions are being taken, and we already have one building going up higher than the trees, and we have many developers interested in adding stories and generally taking advantage of the views and vistas, very, very rarely for affordable housing. We are not against building per se. We are certainly not against affordable housing, but we cherish the views and vistas from London, from Kent across Lewisham, which is a benefit to everybody living in those areas. And we would certainly ask that the council give consideration not to allow buildings through the tree line for until they have carried out all the research. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I will give the council the opportunity to respond in due course. I just wondered, in responding to the MIQs, you've responded to the question in relation to the vision and key spatial objectives. I'm not clear from the representation how you'd want to see the vision and objectives changed to reflect what you've just outlined there.
I raised under matter 11 the issue that the views and vistas for Sydenham Hill are very poor. There is only one, and it's on one tiny corner, and they have not been identified and used in the plan. So the vision that the vistas will be protected does not extend currently to Sydenham Hill, despite it having probably the best in the area. I think there is a mismatch there. I think there is a possibility that, you know, if people knew the area better, that they would have included it. Have I answered you sufficiently on that? I'm not entirely sure that I'm completely getting the terminology right.
So just to be clear, are you looking for an amendment to the vision itself, or there are a number of spatial objectives which follow the vision? It's just to be clear what you are seeking.
We would like an amendment, if possible, that ensures that the current landscape is secured in a way that will enable those vistas to be retained.
Okay, thank you. Can I just ask the council to respond to that, please?
Yes, so we obviously had a kind of discussion about areas of special local character versus areas of special character. I think we mentioned that the areas of special character was an old GLC strategic policy, which was in the previous London plan, which is no longer in the 2021 London plan. This was reflected in our adopted local plan, but given that an area of special character at that regional level doesn't exist anymore in kind of regional policy, but our areas of special local character do, we felt it was important to designate this area and afford the recognition that this area deserves. So we've identified it as an area of special local character in line with our consistent policy. The participant is right. We are currently carrying out a description of significance for this area and for other areas of our areas of special local character, which will provide further detail on why the area has been designated as an area of special local character. I believe the first draft has been prepared and has been issued to residents, groups and amenity societies for comment initially, and then it will go to public consultation more broadly to make sure that we have captured everything in there. That will give a greater level of detail in terms of the significance for that area. And, you know, I accept that the characterization study, whilst, you know, a very important document for the local plan, is a fairly high level document. So the level of detail that we're drilling down into the area of special local character significance will provide I think, an appropriate level of detail. I think it's also worth saying that this area is covered by a neighbourhood forum, designating neighbourhood forum, who again are undertaking analysis of the character of this area, and are progressing with the kind of neighbourhood planning, which will again provide that level of detail. The recommendations that came through from the characterisation study that have been outlined by the participants: protect diversity of the landscape and woodland, protect diverse character, promote strong sense of the woodland. We would contend that, reading the plan as a whole and reading the spatial objectives, they are in there. Whether they're explicit enough related to Sydenham Hill Ridge is something that we could consider, but strategic objective number 9, protect and enhance open green spaces including walkways, along with the distinctive woodland character of the area. Yes, and then in terms of the views, I think again we discussed this. We recognise that Lewisham has a significant or a kind of unique topography. Sydenham Hill Ridge is on a ridge, as the name implies, and therefore, development proposals do need to be sensitive, and they will be assessed through the development management process. The difficulty for the local authority in terms of those wider views is that they tend to be to the south and to the west, those kind of protected views which are out with the borough boundary. There was views identified in previous versions of the London plan which haven't been then brought forward through the LVMF, the framework which manages London's views. Again, I think we said in the previous hearing session discussing this matter that we could certainly promote that with the Sydenham Hills residents and the neighbourhood forum, should that be something that they want to promote through the next revision of the London plan. Yes, and then obviously there's the action which we took away from that session, which we're going to have a look at the views in the design matter as well, and see how we deal with those views, which we can come back on.
And just picking up the specific point raised in terms of providing almost a bit of a hook, I think, in the vision, in terms of a specific mention of this in the overall vision in the West area. What does the council feel about that?
I think that's definitely something that we could do. We could provide a more tangible hook. Although it's in there in terms of the woodland character, we can be more explicit about this particular area in the vision, and be more explicit about this area within the key spatial objectives, particularly when related to Objective 9.
But in terms of the referencing the actual views, just from what you've said, I think, does the council feel it would be a step too far in terms of the fact that the council doesn't necessarily have control over those views?
Yes, I mean, absolutely. We can explore the option of putting them on the map, but we have no control over the protection of those views, because we don't see the applications that come forward in neighbouring boroughs. So that needs to be dealt with at a regional level if that view is considered important at that kind of regional level. We need to promote that through the GLA.
which brings us full circle to the discussion we had the other day. I mean, do you appreciate the point raised by the council that the views to the south and west are largely out with the council's area and sort of outside of the council's control?
Only in part, because as you are aware, we have raised this with both Lewisham and with the GLA, and the answers we have is that both of them say the other one is responsible, and in particular, Lewisham, the GLA feels that Lewisham does have control over the planning decisions it makes within Lewisham that would have an impact out with Lewisham, if you see what I mean. So you build on the top of the hill and everybody can see it. Lewisham residents and, everybody else. There are more protections at the moment on the Southwark side because there is a conservation area and a metropolitan open land area. And at the moment, Lewisham is building just across the road, almost against those principles, for very good reason, I'm quite sure. Would you mind if I just answered some of the other points, or tried to answer them? On your point about the neighbourhood forum, thank you for that suggestion in the previous hearing. The neighbourhood forum is developing its plan and will include vistas and views as suggested, and that's very helpful. In relation to the scope of the area of special local character, it is actually very limited at the moment. It only covers a small area of Sydenham Hill Ridge. There is quite a length of ground towards Crystal Palace that is not covered, and equally towards the Horniman that is not covered. The area covers 2 Lewisham wards, Sydenham and Forest Hill. And I think there is an inclination to consider it perhaps limited to Sydenham rather than seeing it across the whole range. It's much wider, I think, than is currently being addressed. Yeah, I think that's, I think that's all my little notes. We would obviously welcome a more tangible hook to the vision and spatial objectives.
Just coming back to the council, 2 points really about the fact that the council has some control within the actual council area. So if the council could address that, but also in terms of the extent, I don't want to go straight too far into the previous session, but the fact that their special local character is more limited. If you could just address those 2 points, that would be helpful.
Yes, of course, the participant is absolutely right. Obviously, we have control what is built on the ridge on our side. There's no site allocations identified within that area through the local plan, albeit there may be windfall sites that come forward within that area through sensitive intensification, and then those will be assessed through the development management process using the local plan policies that we have, plus also the area of special local character significance statement once that has been through the process, and then hopefully in relation to the neighbourhood plan when that comes, or if it has passed in terms of the referendum. So yes, we will have control over those areas, and hopefully the policies within the local plan are sufficiently robust to make that assessment in terms of the development management process. In terms of the area of the ASLC, my understanding, and forgive me because Joanna's not here, my understanding is that that is essentially the same area as the area of special character within our side. But I can definitely double check that just to make sure that those boundaries are correct and consistent with the area of special character that was in the previous adopted plan and a previous London plan.
Okay, thank you. So as an action point, the council is going to look at providing more tangible hook, if you like, in either the vision or objectives, back to the sort of 6 objectives in the characterisation study. I think in terms of the views, I think it would have to be quite carefully worded from that point of view. So I shall leave that with the council as an action point. Okay, thank you. I was just double checking that I didn't have any specific points on policy LWA1, 2 or 3. Were there any particular points from participants around the table on those policies? No? If that's the case, then we shall move on to the site allocations, starting with Willow Way, Elsis. I shall just get my papers ready on that. Absolutely, yeah, no problem. Okay, thank you. So if I could just ask the council to start off in terms of site LWA 9, Willow Way, Elsis, in terms of just setting a bit of background in terms of the site allocation. Thank you.
So the site is an existing site allocation with since the site allocations local plan 2013 designated as for employment land. We through the employment land study of 2019, we identified this site could be intensified and through the co-location policy within the London plan. Intensified both for employment use and also residential use. We have a number of landowners, including the council, which owns the central part of the site, which is effectively cleared. And we also have 4 other parcels of land, 2 of which are in the in the control of Kitewood, who are participants here, and then a further plot which has an MOT garage on it, which we've been in contact with the landowner, and he is happy for it to be a site allocation. And then there is the industrial estate to the south, as well, which is actually trading fairly well and is fairly successful employment area. In terms of the capacities, the net residential units of 175 has been calculated using density assumptions, with the site character being standard urban PTAL 4, which is 225 dwellings per hectare, and then a 33% percentage ratio of employment to ensure that we have adequate employment space within the area. In terms of up-to-date history, plot A, which is the area to the east of the site allocation, was subject to a planning appeal, which the original decision was dismissed and the decision overturned. So it has approval for 60 net residential dwellings and some employment space, but I can't quite find my calculation in terms of the employment space, but I'm sure Kitewood Estates will clarify that. We've also had pre-application discussion in the past with Kitewood on plots A, B, and C, and a wider master plan for the whole area. In the trajectory, we've. Sorry, I'm moving on a bit too fast. Do you want me to?
I think, yeah, it's fine. Just carry on for now, and then we'll take stock and bring Kitewood in.
Okay. In terms of the trajectory, we've got the 175 units within the 5-year land supply. The council may need to revise that and just split that into appropriate phases. Plot A, I'm sure we'll hear from Kitewood, but the planning application that has now approval, they're hoping to be on site soon, and therefore that can be that 60 units can be delivered probably in advance of the year 5. Plots A, B, and C, we've done some initial master planning work, as I said, and the council were relatively content with the scale and massing of that, which demonstrates that you can get somewhere in the region of 100 to 120 units on those plots A, B, and C. Discussions with the MLT garage to the north of the site suggest that proportion of the site won't come on board until later on in the planned period. So we'll have to use a theoretical calculation to push that further back. And likewise on plot E, which is the business centre, we will have to push that back as well. So we're fairly confident that the overall allocation can, in terms of the 175 net residential units, can be accommodated within the first 5 or 6 years of the plan. We just need to separate and provide additionality for plots D and E. Hopefully that made sense.
So in terms of the overall site capacity, what's that likely to be, taking account of what you've just said?
I haven't quite got those figures to hand, but I can provide them to the inspectors prior to tomorrow's session.
I was trying to scribble them down, but I'm not sure I've got them all down accurately. But yeah, it'd be useful to have an overall picture of how many dwellings can be accommodated on that site and in employment space, and how that would look across the trajectory. I'm conscious that Carney Sweeney have made representations in terms of the site capacities. Hearing what the council has just said, does that address your concerns at this point or not?
Yeah, just in terms of site capacities, just to clarify, I think Mr. Syme, what might have come out of his mouth was different to what was in his brain, but he can clarify that, say that in the nicest possible way. Site A has got planning consent for 60 units, and the figure for employment is 1401 square metres. So that's on site A.
Sorry, 140.
1 square metres, 1,401 square metres. And as Mr. Syme was saying, Kite would expect to be on site next year. And so those 60 units are well within the 5-year period. In terms of sites B and C, Kite would control site C. Site B is owned by Lewisham Estates, which is part of the council. And Kitewood are in advanced discussions with Lewisham Estates with regard to a development agreement on site B, and site B and C would then come forward together as one. As Mr. Syme was saying, pre-application discussions are quite far advanced in terms of a PPA and starting those really detailed discussions. And so a planning application, we were hoping it was going to be submitted by the end of this year. Maybe that might slip into next year, but in any event, it's expected that that would be delivered towards the end of the 5-year period, maybe slightly into year 6, but kind of year 5, year 6. And
Can I just stop you there?
Yeah.
What would be the capacity? What's your understanding of the capacity?
yeah, the capacity, sorry, I was just coming on to that. B and C, we believe that the capacity of B and C is 100 to 120 units. I think Mr. Syme was saying that A, B and C together were 100 and 120 units, but we believe that site A is 60 units and sites B and C together is 100 to 120 units.
So planning application potentially slipping into early next year. When is it foreseen that development would actually commence on site? To the council.
Not sure yet, but I know that our team at the council are obviously this is a key site for them to be developed. It's just a question of whether it's going to be completed by year 5 or year 6, really. So there is a sort of potential for that element of it to slip into year 6, but they are keen to progress as quickly as possible. Just for absolute clarity, if I did say that, then that is an error. Essentially, what I was trying to say was A, B, and C would deliver the maximum net capacity of 175 units. So that correlates with the maths that's been set out there, yes. And then obviously what we do need to do is just then apply the kind of 225 dwellings per hectare to the remainder of the site, which is the northern part and the southern part as well, just to get the uplift.
Because as the trajectory stands at the moment, the 175 would be within year 5. Would that still be the case, but potentially spread over the period, or would there be some of that slip back?
I think so. Absolutely, the 60 units would be in advance of that. Presumably, year 3 and 4. I'm looking at Kitewood in terms of their the build period of the remaining 115. I guess what we're saying is that with a fair wind, it could be year 5, but it could slip into year 6 as well. We do both want to move this as quickly as possible, but we're essentially being honest and realistic about, the potential that it could slip to year 6.
Just ever mindful of the 5-year land supply, which isn't, it's marginal, I would say. Just being conscious of that. Okay, and I'm conscious plot E. It was mentioned in Kitewood Estates representations that the site is already quite intensely developed. So I just wanted to seek the council's view in terms of the development potential of that site.
Yes, I think it is a fair point. It is a fairly successful, intense employment site at the moment. I think 2-story kind of development there with yard space. As I said, there's not a lot of vacancies. The buildings themselves are looking a little tired, which is, I think, why in terms of the employment land study, they had identified it as potentially within the planned period being developed for employment led. Nevertheless, it does, contribute significantly to the vibrancy and the employment flow space within the town centre. So the council could reflect on that and maybe have a look at whether or not we haven't had any contact from the landowner through this process. He hasn't objected, but we haven't had any direct contact about the redevelopment options of this parcel. We have had contact with the landowner of the MOT garage to the north.
Because it was suggested that the site should be deallocated in Kitewood Estates. Representations, would the council go that far? Does the council feel there is some scope, albeit much longer term? Because I don't think it's accounted for, is it, in the trajectory at all? What's council's viewpoint on the retaining the allocation or otherwise?
I think our preference would be to retain it as ELSIS because it gives us the protection then to protect the employment. If it's non-designated employment use, then that's slightly less protection, and given its valuable contribution, we'd like it to be, I think, retained within the site allocation. I think it's important as well that, and this is something that we can discuss through the kind of PPA, that we do consider as part of the kind of wider master plan, should it come forward beyond, in year 15 or post 15, just making sure it's a fairly discrete parcel, but it is important just to make sure that the development on plots A and plots B and C don't prohibit any future redevelopment of that site.
Okay, thank you. And what are the potential adverse impacts of developing the site, and how could those be mitigated? Are there any potential showstoppers, for example?
There's no significant showstoppers within the site. There are some heritage assets adjacent to the site which would need to be considered, which were considered through the kind of initial master planning process. There are some significant services along Willow Way, but I don't think there's any intention of moving that road. It would just be about public realm improvements to that street. So there's no significant infrastructure constraints.
Okay, thank you. It was mentioned that certainly in terms of the site that has permission, that it's car free. Is that right? And just it's something I did notice on site, that parking seems to be a little bit of an issue along Willow Way, because obviously it is sort of a well-used industrial estate. What potential highways impact could there be from intensifying the use of the site, given the parking situation at present?
Those will have to be dealt with through the development management process. We obviously have a London plan that is quite strict on its policies on car parking. This is PTAL 4, so it will be a car-free development. The council will have to manage that, whether that's through CPZ within the area, which we are effectively adopting a borough-wide strategy on implementing CBZs across the borough to help control or manage parking demand.
Are there any other infrastructure requirements or cost or other physical constraints which may affect viability of the site coming forward?
I mean, in terms of the designations and site considerations, it's in a critical drainage area, but that is a common issue across all site allocations, pretty much within Lewisham and within London. So there'll be a need to ensure that there's sufficient capacity there, and working with Thames Water. As I said, it's adjacent to some locally listed buildings, which will need to be considered and adjacent to the conservation area. And then there's an area of special local character as well.
Ms. Carney, did you wish to raise a point?
Thank you. It was just on the transport situation and the highways and the parking that occurs on Willow Way at the moment. I would respectfully refer the inspectors to Appendix 5 of our submitted statement to the EIP, which is technical transport evidence from velocity transport planning, which was discussed as part of the appeal into Site A about how Willow Way functions at the moment and how it's envisaged to function in the future. The intention is that there will be double yellow lines along Willow Way, that servicing will be undertaken on site or in clear bays, and so that the mess of parking, which definitely occurs at the moment, does not continue in the future, and the redevelopment of the sites on Willow Way offers the opportunity to resolve that and sort that out, and make it much more attractive, to improve the public realm, and, as I say, to resolve that parking problem as it exists at the moment. I can also confirm the intention is to keep Willow Way in its existing position, so the infrastructure beneath Willow Way will not be affected, and through the work that Kitewood have undertaken as part of the master planning exercise and the detailed considerations at appeal on Site A, there are no significant infrastructure restrictions envisaged to plots, definitely to plots A, B and C. Site D, we're not expecting anything, and as I say, it's our view that Site E probably will continue in its existing form.
I think we've covered how it's intended to bring the site forward. I've already touched on that. Mechanisms to ensure comprehensive and coordinated approach to development. Obviously, we have the overall illustrative master plan in place, which accompanied the application. We've touched on expected timescales and rates of development. In terms of viability, just firstly coming to the council in terms of the viability study and what that says, but I presume that's been, in terms of site A, been taken over by a site-specific viability assessment. So we'll start with the council.
Yes, we looked at this through the kind of typological approach. Probably viability 13 is the most appropriate in terms of the mixed use and the scale of the development, which shows that there is a range of options which are viable, depending on the percentage of affordable, etc. But also we now have a scheme, albeit for a small proportion of the area, which has come forward, which has demonstrated that there is a viable scheme there, and we see no reason why that can't be then applied to the other parts of the site.
Just to clarify on site A, 50% affordable housing is provided as part of the consented proposals. Because 50% affordable housing was proposed, a viability assessment didn't need to be submitted because it met the policy requirements. But the work that Kitewood have done internally, it is viable to continue, and hence why they're looking to be on site next year. Sites B and C, the work that Kitewood have already undertaken on sites B and C, the development capacities that we've talked about make the site viable. They're very happy that B and C can be viable. They've no reason to think that site D can't be developed viably, but as we've said in our evidence, we consider that there would be no benefit in redeveloping site A because the capacity that you would achieve on site relative to the development that's already there probably wouldn't make the site attractive for redevelopment.
Okay, thank you. Any modifications for this particular one?
Yes, there are some modifications to LWA SA09. So for clarification, there are no modifications introduced under document PD11. However, the addendum that was submitted on Thursday at the very end does include a modification which is referenced MO 311. And perhaps the examination won't be surprised to learn that following dynamic processes that have been going on since Thursday, there is a further slight modification to that addendum. So the modification MO 311 should read yes for years 1 to 5 and yes for years 6 to 10. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments in relation to this site before we move on? Okay, thank you. We shall move on to the next one, site LWA 03 Jenner Health Centre. I'll just get my papers together, and if you wish to leave in the meantime, do feel free. Okay, moving on to LWA 03 Jenner Health Centre. Again, if the council could just give a little bit of background to the site allocation, please.
The Jenner Health Centre is part of the One Public Estate strategy that the council has agreed with the Lewisham and Greenwich NHS Trust, which is an overall strategy to provide the healthcare provision required to accommodate growth predicted through the local plan process. This site was identified through a call for site exercise in the 2017 London SLAB, but also in 2018 the Lewisham call for site. We also did have a number of high-level concepts, pre-apps with the trust, looking at the redevelopment of this site, which is, as I say, part of the strategy. We've used a density-based assumption in terms of the working out the development potential, so in line with the site's character, standard urban PTEL2, generating a density of 145. We've used a land use mix of 50% residential and 50% main town centre uses, essentially to re-provide the health centre facility. That results in 30 net residential units and 2,000, just over 2,000 gross square metres of non-residential floor space, town centre floor space, to provide the re-provision of the health centre, and we've got that in years 11 to 15 within the trajectory.
I'm aware of the representations from NHS Property Services, which refer to pre-application discussions where a redevelopment scheme of up to 50 dwellings and 1,650 square metres of non-residential space were discussed, and obviously they're seeking to have the capacity increased. What's the council's view on that?
So obviously we certainly want to work collaboratively with the NHS Trust to make sure that the site is viable and re-provides the health provision that it needs through the One Public Estate strategy. I have to confess I don't remember the pre-app discussions myself, but the council can certainly have a look at that pre-application discussion, discuss that with our DM colleagues, and see if they were broadly happy with the pre-application discussions back then. I think there was an increased capacity within the Regulation 18 document. If the inspectors would allow us to do some digging on that and make sure that we have the most accurate and up-to-date figures, and we can then update that and provide that for tomorrow's session if that's possible.
You refer to potentially a slightly different capacity at Reg 18, but was there a reason why, in that case, the capacity was reduced? For example, looking at the, the sort of residential character of the surrounding area, for example. What's the council's view as to whether the site could accommodate increased capacities and be in character with the surrounding area?
Yes, it may well be that we took the decision to reduce the net residential units to down to 30 on that basis, looking at the surrounding context. Forgive me, it would be helpful if we could dig out the pre-application pack essentially and just see what the massing was looking like for this site. I note that the NHS Trust have essentially said that they don't require the 2,000 square metres of gross main town or gross floor area, that it's only 1,600 that they require. So that obviously could then increase the net residential units. But if we can, as I said, if we can just have a look at the pre-application pack that was provided, and then we can come back to the inspectors on that one.
That would be very helpful, thank you. And are there any potential adverse impacts of developing the site? And if so, how could those be mitigated?
There's no strategic infrastructure requirements other than the re-provision of the health centre now. My understanding, and again we will double check this through the pre-application process, is that we didn't discuss whether or not the centre had to continue operating whilst the redevelopment took place. But I'll certainly have a look at that in terms of the pre-application discussion. But clearly, if there is continuity required there, then that is going to be a challenge given the nature of the site.
Yeah, I think even trying to accommodate some form of temporary arrangement on the site might be quite difficult. Is that something the council could consider, and because obviously it could affect the deliverability of the site? The council take that away and have a think about it.
Yes, we will. We'll have a look at the pre-application advice that we were given, see if we had any details on that, and then if not, we'll endeavour to contact the NHS Trust and see if they have any thoughts around that.
Nowhere obvious in the vicinity either, but yeah, I think that could be a tricky point, bringing the site forward. But no other potential adverse effects that the council is aware of.
No, just in terms of the kind of temporary, creating a temporary facility, there obviously is to the north of the site some space in terms of parking area. There's also a building which is slightly disconnected, although it's attached by a corridor, but disconnected from the main bulk of the building. Again, we'll go and have a discussion with the NHS Trust, but it is conceivable that a temporary building be placed in that northern section whilst the rest of it's built out. But we will come back to the inspectors on that.
And in terms of viability, what does the whole plan viability study say, or was there an indication in pre-app discussions about any viability concerns that they might have had?
It's tested under viability typology 15, which is kind of mixed use, including health. I think, as we discussed before in a previous session, there is always going to be a kind of viability issue associated with the re-provision of a health centre. My understanding is that the One Public Estate strategy does consider the use of strategic sale and also other funding by the NHS Trust, as well as the residential development to effectively cross-subsidise that facility being re-provided.
So it's indicated in the trajectory that site will come forward years 11 to 15. What's the basis for that assumption in terms of how the council sees that site coming forward?
I mean, again, we are taking our cues from the NHS Trust and the One Public Estate. The strategy at the moment is there is a number of properties throughout the borough that are being refurbished first, and then they'll be moving on to the redevelopment options, of which this will be one, and the previous one that we discussed in the south would be the second in terms of moving forward.
So does the NHS have other property services team have a kind of a strategy in place is there a kind of a public document available with a strategy and timescales in?
There is a public document, the One Public Estate strategy. I hesitate to say that it has got a timeline in it. I don't think it does. It just has a broad indication of which properties will be refurbished and which will be redeveloped. We can certainly ask the NHS Trust if there is a timeline for that, and if that is public, whether they'd be willing to, or whether they'd be willing to share it if it is public.
Would be helpful. Thank you. And is the site entirely in NHS ownership? There's no sort of leasehold or anything like that?
No, it's entirely in the control of the NHS Trust.
And presumably the council would require a master plan for a site-specific master plan to accompany the application.
Yes, yes. I mean, given the scale of the site, site layout, particularly looking at the phasing, but yes, that would be provided.
Just before we come on to the council's modifications, I'm conscious that the NHS have suggested some modifications in their written statement. So they're suggesting that the number of net residential units be altered to 50, which obviously the council is going to have a look at. They're also suggesting that the main town centre uses, rather than specify a figure, just should stay in line with local health commissioners' estate strategy. What does the council feel about those proposed mods?
I think obviously we can look at the net residential units. Clearly, again, the council wants to work with the NHS Trust to ensure that the re-provision or re-provided floor space meets the aspiration of the NHS Trust. I think we do, however, need to have a figure in there, albeit, it is indicative at the moment, simply to ensure consistency across all the site allocations.
Yeah, I think they've suggested development requirement 1 is altered in a similar fashion, but in terms of the reference to appropriate re-provision of the existing healthcare facility in line with policy CI1, they're seeking reference to and local health commissioners' estate strategy within development requirement 1. I assume the council's response will be the same within their written statement.
Just as a footnote for the benefit of the inspectors, as per last week, I believe it was in relation to the other re-provision of another healthcare centre in the Lewisham South area, the council's response to matter 23 at, let me get this straight, Annex 1, focus updates to the infrastructure delivery plan. That includes an input from the trust that makes reference to this site allocation. I'm afraid it doesn't provide the detail that's been requested, but it does provide a position statement, albeit that it's now a few weeks old from the trust. Thank you.
I mean, just in terms of the changing to the wording, I think development requirement 1 provides sufficient flexibility, and likewise, policy CI1 also provides sufficient flexibility as part of an overarching strategy. So I think, as I say, I think as we've always said, these are indicative development capacities, and we will work with the NHS Trust to get an appropriate square meterage.
Okay, I tend to agree with that. I don't think there's a need to reference that additional wording that's been suggested, but certainly if the council could look at the site capacity, that would be helpful. Thank you. From the council's point of view, are there any specific modifications?
I will just double check, but I don't believe there are any modifications for this site allocation. Oh, that is the case. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I have no further questions on that particular site. So if we can move on to LWA 1 Endwell Road. Just bear with me while I get my papers together. Okay, site 111 to 115 Endwell Road. Again, could the council just give a little bit of background to how the site was identified, please?
Yeah, so the site was an existing site allocation within the local plan 2013 for mixed-use commercial employment use on the ground floor with housing above. It was identified through the London SHLA 2017 as a site that could contribute to the overall housing supply. In terms of the site allocation within the local plan, one of the landowners expressed interest in developing the site through the landowner engagement survey in 2019. We haven't had any objections from the other landowners. It is a site within multiple land ownership, but nevertheless, given the proximity to the train station and given the kind of the uses on the site, we do think it's a suitable site for intensification, re-providing those employment and town centre floor space with residential above. We've applied a mathematical approach with the density assumption responding to the site's character, standard urban PTAL 4, 225 dwellings per hectare. We've included the 33% employment to reflect the employment uses on the site, which then results in 57 net residential units and 1,975 square metres of gross employment floor space.
And there's a full application on the site. Has that been taken into account in the standard density assumptions?
It's for a small proportion of the site, the old MOT centre, which is new employment floor space. I think the officers would have to double check to see whether that has been factored in terms of the gross employment floor space and then the relative net residential units.
So that was just purely for employment use.
That's correct, yes.
Yeah, it would be helpful if the council could check that and whether that would affect the net residential units on the site. Thank you. And any potential adverse impacts of developing the site?
There is a locally listed church on the site, which obviously we would any development would have to take into consideration. There is no other strategic infrastructure requirements. Just bear with. The site, as it's adjacent to the railway, obviously there is it's adjacent to the site of importance for nature conservation and adjacent to MOL, so that would be a key consideration, and it's adjacent to a conservation area as well.
But no constraints that can't necessarily be mitigated through good design.
No.
So are there any sort of atypical infrastructure requirements or costs that might prevent development coming forward?
No.
In the time frame for delivery in the plan to check the trajectory is years 6 to 10. Given the multiple land ownership on the site, how does the council foresee the site coming forward, and what assumptions have been made in terms of the site coming forward within the years 6 to 10?
I think in terms of the trajectory, that was reflecting the landowners' expression of interest, which is why we've got it in year 8 of the plan. You're absolutely right. The multiple landowner does complicate things. That's not to say the site couldn't come forward as individual plots with an overall master plan in place, but I do concede that year 8 may be ambitious in terms of the trajectory.
Just looking at the trajectory, there are 57 units, year 8. It's just on what basis has that been? Is the landowner, have the landowners actually given an indication of when they're likely to bring the site forward, or is it just a broad estimate from the council's point of view?
It's just a broad estimate from a council point of view at the moment. The landowners haven't given any timescale.
Just one point of clarification. The church that is on the site has been removed from the boundary, so that element is not to be redeveloped.
Just in terms of other sites where we don't have a particularly strong indication from the landowner in terms of when that site's going to come forward, I think there's been a tendency to sort of push the site back a little bit. I'm just thinking in my mind, is this one of those sites where there isn't really very strong evidence from a landowner point of view when that site will come forward, the multiple land ownerships involved, whether it might be a little bit ambitious? Yeah, right.
Yes, we can certainly take a look at that and push that towards the end of the plan period as a more realistic proposition.
In terms of viability, just looking at what typology would it come under?
In terms of the typology, we would suggest typology 12 is the most appropriate given the scale of residential development and then non-residential floor space.
So in theory, could be reasonably viable up to around 35% affordable housing.
Yes, and obviously it's not too dissimilar in terms of the re-provision of employment floor space, the residential capacity in terms of other sites that we've looked at, which we know are viable. The Kitewood site that has obviously been through appeal as well.
Any modifications for this site?
There are no modifications proposed for this site allocation.
Okay, thank you. Just looking at the time, it's coming up to 11 o'clock. So it might be a good time to pause for an adjournment. Is 11:20 okay with everyone? We shall adjourn until 11:20. Thank you. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Moving on through the agenda, could look at site 2, 6 Mantle Road. I understand this is an existing allocation in the site allocations local plan for mixed use housing with commercial.
Yes, there has been an update since the submission of the local plan. So the an application was submitted towards the end of November 2023 for the site, which includes 46 units and 316 square meters of commercial floor space. Officers have been working with the applicant to iron out some issues, and a decision will be made imminently on that site. We have reflected the 46 units within the trajectory as an update, and we're anticipating that that will be delivered in the first 5 years of the plan.
So obviously that's a higher number of residential units than initially anticipated in the plan, but probably a slightly lower element of non-residential floor space. The plan has 95 metres square of gross employment space and 378 metres square of gross main town centre floor space. And you mentioned a figure of 360 metres square. What of commercial floor space? What do you mean by is it commercial?
I think it's Class E and encompasses all of Class E.
So what was the site previously? 'Cause it was all boarded up when I visited.
It's actually been vacant for about at least 6, 7, maybe longer years. Long time.
So there wouldn't necessarily be a net loss of sort of employment floor space as such.
No.
And are there any adverse impacts of developing the site? And if so, how could those be mitigated?
No adverse impacts on the site. There is, I believe, access required to the back of the site to the railway sidings, but all of that has been mitigated and considered through the development management process of the application.
So when you say access required to the back of the site, why is that?
Along the railway, there's I believe it's a sort of 7-meter strip that is required from the railway infrastructure to be kept as kind of non-developable area, and should the Network Rail require access to that they can get access to that. That's all been considered through the application. It's a fairly standard consideration with sites adjacent to railway sidings.
And in terms of viability, presumably with the application coming forward, the landowner considers the site to be viable at those densities.
Yes. We had considered the site under viability typology 10, but clearly that's been overtaken by the kind of detailed viability work through the DM process.
What percentage of affordable housing do you know? So
We are in negotiation at the moment on that basis.
would the requirement be 50% being employment land? Or
I think given that the site has been vacant for so long, I'd have to get back to the inspectors on that, but I don't think it's been considered as employment land and therefore requiring the 50%, albeit the planning application and negotiations that we're having, it isn't a fast track application either, so it hasn't met the 35% threshold, which is why we're or in discussions with the landowners on that one.
is it in single ownership?
Yes.
And so in terms of bringing the site forward, the site would be within years 1 to 5 now.
That's correct, yes.
Any modifications?
Yes, there are some modifications. So these are modifications that are identified under both submitted document PD11 and the addendum from last Thursday, and they are identified under modification MO266, which relates to policy LWASA2 6 Mantle Road, and that these relate to the position within the housing land supply trajectory, and it's a change. So yes, in years 1 to 5, and yes, deleted in years 6 to 10. The number of net residential units has also been amended from 20 to 46. If the inspectors could just indulge me for 1 second, I will just confirm whether there is a further modification. And the answer is no, there isn't. That is it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So moving on, I was going to suggest looking at sites 4 and 5 at Forest Hill Station together. Would that be acceptable? So if we can do that in a moment, thank you. If the council could just start by giving a brief overview of those sites, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, so these sites are on either side of the Forest Hill station, site allocation 4 on the eastern side and site allocation 5 on the western side. Obviously have good public transport accessibility, PTEL 5. They are both in mixed ownership of a number of land ownerships within each of the sites. Land 4 and 5 are both site allocations within the local plan 2013 that have been carried forward. With site 4, we have had interest from a landowner in the past, and we did have a concept pre-app a number of years ago on this site, looking at mixed use redevelopment. We have taken it forward through the Regulation 18 and 19 consultations. We haven't had any of the landowners objecting to the sites being or continuing to be identified as site allocations. The density assumptions are similar, in fact, similar on each. They're town centre, urban, PTEL 5, so 260 dwellings per hectare. So in terms of plot 4, that then results in 41 net residential units, 191 gross employment floor space and 764 square metres of gross town centre floor space. In plot 5, 80 net residential units, 800 square metres of gross employment floor space and 1,600 main town centre uses. I think it is worth saying that we've had a number of applications within the wider area of Forest Hill coming forward and being completed or on site as well. The residential value is fairly high within this area. So in terms of viability, we don't necessarily see an issue with the viability within this area.
And given that the allocations are carried forward from the previous plan and that they haven't come forward to date, what confidence does the council have that they will come forward within this plan period?
As I said, we did have interest from one of the significant landowners of plot 4, albeit that was prior to the Regulation 19 consultation on the plan. As I said, what we are seeing is renewed interest within Forest Hill, and particularly with the values currently within the kind of Forest Hill area. It seems like an attractive proposition for developers and landowners now. There's also a community master plan which was prepared by the Sydenham Society and Discourse Architecture around about 3-4 years ago, which again identified these sites. And whilst that master plan doesn't have any official status, what it did show was that there is strong public support for the redevelopment of these sites. And we think it's the council feels it's important to carry forward these site allocations, particularly to give it if they do come forward, and we're confident they will within the plan period, that there is some development requirements and guidelines there to guide future development in a coherent way.
Just given the multiple land ownerships there across the two sites, how is it envisaged that those sites would come forward? Would the council play a role in helping to consolidate land, for example?
It is something that we have considered. It is worth saying, and I know we've had a lot of conversations about the Bell Green neighbourhood master plan, but this is also an area where certainly myself and my team have been suggesting that given the cluster of sites and given the multiple land ownership and given that the community have also prepared a master plan, that this is a key area that requires a master planning approach or a framework approach by the council.
But even with a master plan in place, how would the development on the ground happen? How would it be instigated?
Well, we'd hope it would come forward through developer interest, and as I said, we have had landowner interested in moving one of the sites forward, and we would hope that with the site allocations being renewed, but also through a kind of master plan led approach, that would also garner interest from developers and landowners. And as I said, what we are seeing is renewed interest within this area on a number of other sites.
Okay, thank you. Any adverse impacts of bringing the site forward, or constraints given sort of potential previous uses of the land?
In terms of considerations, both sites are next to the railway land, so there would have to be consideration of requirements from Network Rail. Also, there is on either side access to the station. So again, that would have to be considered. The areas are adjacent to a sink. They're also adjacent to conservation areas. And like many of our sites, they are in critical drainage areas and in air quality focus areas. So again, these are considerations that would have to be, discussed and considered through the development management process. But we believe that the policies are in place to deal with those, and we don't think there's anything significant that would not be able to be overcome through the development management process.
And any potential highway implications of development, or particular considerations, for example, in terms of keeping access to the station itself, etc.
Yes, we definitely want to retain access to the station on the western side for taxis and for drop-offs. In terms of the development itself, because of its PTEL 5, this would be car-free development. So there wouldn't be any significant requirements for additional car parking, albeit we'd have to plan for any disabled spaces that are a requirement here. But there wouldn't be any significant increase in terms of the number of trips, etc., that are required. Clearly, there would be improvements at a local level required to service these sites. But I think the biggest constraint or driver would be maintaining that access to the station for drop-off and for taxis.
And in terms of viability, given the multiple land ownerships, from what you've said, it's obviously quite a high value area. So would there be any viability concerns bringing the sites forward?
I think what I'd say is that I think it would range depending on the individual site ownerships. I don't see any particular reason why, for example, site allocation 4 can be brought forward given the high values. given the high values in existing land uses there, and also the more substantial parcels in terms of land ownership. With plot 5, obviously there's a large proportion in Network Rail ownership, and then several multiple ownerships. But again, what we're seeing in Forest Hill is that it is a viable location to redevelop at this scale and for these types of uses in other schemes.
The council doesn't foresee the need for public funding, for example, to bring the sites forward.
No.
So if we take site 4 and site 5 in turn, in terms of the trajectory, I think they're both within years 11 to 15. Is that still the case?
Yes, that's still the case. So they're towards the end of the planned period in years 13.
And just in terms of trajectory, the sites are just within year 13. They're not spread across the trajectory. Is the development likely to happen in one lump, if you if you like?
I mean, it's probably likely to be done in phases, in accordance with the land ownership, unless a developer comes in, gets the rights over multiple land ownership. We've simply made an assumption that the sites will be delivered around that year 13, given a sort of lack of concrete evidence otherwise.
Yeah, and it may just be worth looking at sort of phasing within the plan period, but just phasing it across I think particularly the 80 units could see potential to come forward in more than one phase, but just something to think about anyway.
Yeah, we can go away and look at that and see if that would be more appropriate to spread across that plan period.
Thank you. I didn't have any more questions in terms of that site. So we'll move on to site 6, Perryvale, Elsis. Thank you.
Sorry,
Modification.
Inspector Malloy, that there is one minor modification. It is, as I say, rather minor. It's identified under modification reference MO 140. It corrects typographic errors in the supporting text at 18.34, 5 and 6. I think the sub paragraphs have run together. Thank you.
Thank you for that. So if we can move on to site 6 now. Thank you. Okay, LWA 6 Perivale Elsis. This is another site allocation designated local employment land, which the employment land study identified as suitable for employment-led mixed-use development. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. The land has broadly two, or has two land ownerships. One is a public car park, which is in council ownership, and then the second is the Forest Hill Industrial Estate. As you say, the existing LEL land was assessed through the employment land study and suggested it could be co-located with residential development, and obviously the surface car park in reference to London Plan Policy H1 that I've referenced before suggests that we should identify these types of sites for redevelopment to come forward. We've used a density assumption, albeit given the site and given its proximity to the station and lack of sensitivities around it, we have adjusted the character setting upwards. Given it's PTEL 5, generating a density of 405 dwellings per hectare, which effectively results in 146 net residential units and 10,000 square meters of employment floor space. In terms of the trajectory, we've got it within years 13 and 14. The council is currently undertaking a review of all its assets, and this is an area that we're looking at, but there's no committed timeline for bringing forward this site as of yet, which is why we've pushed it towards the end of the plan period.
So the site's in council ownership?
The northern part of the site is in council ownership.
The southern part?
That's in private ownership.
Is that private single ownership or multiple ownership?
I believe it's a single ownership, but if I may, I can come back to you on that.
And have any discussions taken place with the landowner on that site yet?
No discussions as of yet. As I said, the council is currently doing kind of asset review. The intention is to finish that asset review and then have a discussion with the landowners. There will need to be some consideration in terms of the phasing of that site and how that would be phased with potentially the use of the car park enabling future phases.
And just in terms of any constraints which may preclude or inhibit development in any way?
Other than previously described constraints next to railway, for example, critical drainage area, there's nothing specific that would prohibit the development coming forward that couldn't be overcome through the development management process.
Any access constraints? I seem to remember, if it's the right site, that there's quite a steep access into the site.
Yes, there is a change in level. I'm not sure whether that would be a significant constraint or not. Obviously, again, there would need to be access for the reprovision of the employment, but that is the access that they currently use that serves the southern part of the site.
So potentially two accesses into the site.
If I remember correctly, I think it might be difficult to get 2 access points to the site because of the change in level. So whilst on the plan, it looks like southern access could be achieved. If my memory serves me correct, there's a change in level between those parts of the site, so it might be a single point of access.
The highways haven't raised concerns that it would be a constraint in any way in terms of the, the capacities of the site.
They haven't raised concerns at this stage, no.
You mentioned that the southern access was used at present, is that right?
I would have to get back to the inspectors on that. I don't think it's used as a vehicular access at the moment to serve the Forest Hill Industrial Estate. I think it's used to service or used to access the residential properties. But forgive me, I'll have to provide further detail on that.
So in terms of bringing the site forward, does the council see itself leading on this site, given the council's land ownership to the north?
That's the broad intention at the moment. As I say, we're currently doing that asset review and considering this site, but the general approach or the approach could be, given that there is effectively the surface car parking area there, that could then facilitate the first phases of development, which then could facilitate any relocation of businesses that are then required to be kind of demolished in the latter phases, if that makes sense.
And would a master plan be prepared as part of that process for the whole site?
Yes, we'd be expecting, in line with DM3 master plan, to be prepared for this particular site. As I said before, there is an aspiration to prepare a wider framework as well for the town centre, albeit in the same way as the status for the Belgreen Lower Sydenham. We haven't yet allocated any funding for that.
And in terms of the timing and phasing of development, the trajectory shows the 73 units coming forward year 13 and 73 units year 14. What's the basis of that?
Essentially just a broad brush approach, looking at the site in terms of its land ownership, split broadly half and half, and we pushed it towards the end of the planned period to enable essentially the asset review to take place, and then any master planning work required. Given the complexities of the site, we felt that it was appropriate to push it towards the end of the plan period.
Sorry, I may have already said this, but what's the time frame for the asset review? When's that likely to be completed?
I believe it's imminently, but again, if I could get back to you on that, because I understand that there has been a little bit of a delay on that.
And is that likely to set out a program, if you like, of site development and timescales and things? Which sites are priorities and which might be later on in the process?
It will set out certainly site priorities. Again, I'd have to get back to you if there was actually going to be any timescales within that asset review, but it's certainly looking at priorities in terms of development and disposal in the future.
Thank you. Any modifications? There's MO 140.
There are no modifications for this site allocation.
I did have a note of MO 140, but could be wrong on that. Just have a look.
Yes, modification MO 140. That related to the previous allocation. Supporting text paragraph 18.34.
That's fine.
Okay, no worries.
Okay, thank you. That wraps up my questions on that particular site. So if we move on to site 7 and Clyde Vale, Elsis. I think similar to the previous site, it was shown in the site allocations plan as some designated employment land has been subsequently identified as employment-led mixed-use development in the employment study.
Yes, that is correct. Yes, and we've applied a similar density assumption to the previous site. So that then 405 dwellings per hectare, which then has an output of 21 net residential units, 1,700 square meters of gross employment floor space. We have had some limited conversations with the landowner for the site, and we've had a concept pre-app on this. So he is very much interested in developing the site within the planned period and supportive of it being a site allocation. I think it's fair to say there's some way to go in terms of pre-application discussions and finding an appropriate mix of units versus employment.
Seemed pretty well utilised. On my site visit, all units seem to be in use. So there'd obviously be the issue of potential relocation of existing businesses.
Yes, I think that's the case. When we were looking at, albeit at a very high level, um, there would have to be some relocation of existing businesses elsewhere, and then a phased approach in terms of, I think we were looking at two broad phases and two broad blocks, essentially. But yes, there would have to be a kind of relocation strategy for that initial phase to take place.
Is it a single landowner?
It is, yes.
Depends on the extent of how many, contractual arrangements with each of the units as well, I imagine.
Yes, and again, this was a very high level conversation, initial conversation, and we haven't got into that level of detail.
Hence why the site has suggested beyond the 15-year period.
Yes, I think given that we've had initial conversations, there is a question about whether or not that could come forward, in advance of that 16-year period. But there is the complexity around the relocation of businesses, etc.
Okay, so is the council comfortable with leaving it beyond the 15-year period?
I would suggest, if I may, we'd probably like to move it into the 15-year period, particularly given we've had initial conversations.
In terms of viability, presumably as the landowner is interested in bringing it forward, there's obviously some interest there. What's the viability assessments say? It's the same typology as a previous.
Yes, it's broadly the same typology, albeit there's in that kind of typological range, there's a range of residential units in each of those. We've got no reason to, and the viability assessment suggests that these sites are viable, albeit depending on the sales value and the percentage of affordable housing. As I said previously, we have got schemes which are coming forward, not dissimilar to this elsewhere within the western area. Forest Hill generally tends to command slightly better land values than some of those sites. So there's no reason why it wouldn't be viable and why affordable housing couldn't be provided on the site.
Any adverse impacts of developing the site?
It's next to a sink, which will have to be a consideration. But other than that, and the critical drainage area, there's nothing that couldn't be ironed out at the development management stage.
And any modifications?
There are no modifications for this site allocation.
Okay, thank you. So if we can move on to LWA 7, Clyde. LWA 8, Featherstone Lodge. Thank you.
So this site was identified in the London SLA 2017. It is a site which has a lapsed planning consent, which has been brought forward, 100% residential with an indicative capacity of 33 net residential units. We have to say though, despite contacting the landowners, there has been no direct response from them. They haven't objected to the site being identified through the local plan, but equally there hasn't been any engagement from the landowner.
So presumably the intention is to retain the existing lodge and develop in the grounds to the rear.
That's correct. That was the planning application's approach. Yes.
There are obviously quite a few mature trees in the gardens to the rear. How has that affected the site capacities?
Well, it's quite a significant site in terms of the area, 0.64 hectares, and I think the 33, the low kind of residential capacity reflects the need to respond to those that mature landscaping.
And in terms of access constraints, I kind of drove up there and then slightly regretted it when I got to the top. How is it envisaged that you know that any access improvements would be made to help bring the site forward?
I believe the previous application looked at improving Julian Taylor Path. I understand as the principal access, but we could certainly provide further detail on that in terms of the planning application.
Vehicular access.
I think as a pedestrian access in the first instance, I'm not sure where the vehicular access was proposed for the site, but we can certainly dig out the planning application and provide that to the inspectors.
That would be helpful. There seemed to be limited capacity to potentially widen certainly Elliott Bank and you know other potential access points to it. So it might be helpful to have some feedback on that. There's clearly some newish development adjacent to the site, but maybe the 33 net residential units hasn't tipped over into the next scale of access requirements, but it'd be helpful to know.
Yes, we can provide that level of detail. Obviously, that would have been assessed at the time of the application, albeit, you know, that was a few years ago, and there might be some additional considerations and requirements should a new application come forward.
Yeah, my colleagues just pointed me to the reference in the plan to the existing planning consent, which appeared to be, which is albeit lapsed, but it was for over 55s housing, so potentially was the assumption that the car ownership maybe wasn't going to be as high as it might otherwise been. I think if the council could just clarify that would be helpful.
Yes, no problem. Yep.
So viability, what does the viability assessment say?
So it's considered under typology 6, small residential development. Clearly at 100% residential, there are significant options which are deemed to be viable, depending obviously on the value, residential values and the proportion of affordable housing.
And in terms of land ownership, is it within single land ownership?
Yes, I believe so, yes.
The sites included within years 11 to 15, what's the basis of that, as opposed to later on, beyond the 15-year time period?
I think we were considering this, obviously, whilst it is a significant size overall, that it is in terms of the capacity, it's a relatively small site in terms of the capacity, and therefore it could be completed fairly quickly. However, despite that, clearly we haven't had any direct response from the landowner as of yet, and therefore we pushed it into the latter third of the plan period, years 11 to 15. I think it's just a broad assumption, but it could go anywhere between those kind of years of 11 to 15.
And just as there have been a number of sites where the council said that there hasn't been an objection from the landowner. Does that necessarily mean to say that they don't object, or could it possibly mean that they're not aware of it? Just in terms of that broad principle and categorising the sites in that time frame, if there hasn't been any contact with the landowner. The council's taken the fact there hasn't been an objection as almost it being okay, but is that the case, or maybe that the landowner's just not aware of the allocation, for example?
I think that we did do a landowner survey specifically targeted to some sites within the borough, and also at regulation 18 and 19 stages, we did a notification letter which was sent out to every single landowner, and that was freeholders and also leaseholders within the site allocations. So I think if they had have missed both of those occasions, it would have been pretty unlikely.
I think also just to say as well that both in terms of the regulation 18 and 19, we publish site notices as well for all site allocations within the vicinity of the sites. So again, notifying landowners of our intention to identify it within the local plan.
So it may be that the landowner's waiting for the allocation, and then you may get a flurry of phone calls potentially.
That could be. I mean, we can't be 100% sure that they have seen the information that we provided or the site notices, etc. Yes, we can't be 100% sure.
Obviously, there was a previous application on the site. Does the council know why that was allowed to lapse and wasn't brought forward?
We don't know the reasons now.
Okay, thank you. And in terms of viability, I don't know whether that's a factor in the application not being implemented, for example, but as you say, it's quite a reasonably high value area. So no reason to think that would be the case.
No, and given it's 100% residential, as you say, in a high value area, there doesn't seem to be any intel to tell us that viability is the issue.
And the policy, I think, requires the existing building to be retained, so a locally listed building. How is that occupied at the moment?
I'm not sure at the moment. We can see if we can find the information on that.
That an older person's, home, something like that, because it's obviously quite a large property. Given the fact that the site in the development requirements would be, steering towards specialist and older persons accommodation, I wondered if that reflected the existing use.
I think we'd have to get back to you on that. I'm sure a colleague from development management might be able to tell us who was here at the time.
Yeah, I was just thinking in terms of whether the existing occupiers would be relocated or whether they would just stay put with the development going on around them. Just trying to think how the site would come forward.
Yes, I mean the site itself is obviously quite a sizable site, but in terms of the development area, given the mature planting, I think again we'd have to if we can provide the information in terms of the planning application, that might give us a better sense of how this was planned to be phased, etc.
Any modifications?
There are no modifications for this site allocation.
Okay, thank you. If we can then move on to LWA SA 10, 74 to 78 Sydenham Road. Thank you. So this site seemed to be in use as a gym at present. So where's the allocation come from as a background to the allocation of the site?
Again, we were effectively looking at the policy requirement in the London plan about making efficient use of land, but also the policy H1 in terms of efficiencies of blocks. And there's essentially a cluster of 3 sites around this particular area which felt suitable for redevelopment, and particularly given the kind of nature of the building on this site. Whilst we recognise that it is in kind of active use, it is of an age which we are seeing sites coming forward in this area and elsewhere within the borough for redevelopment and intensification, which is essentially the reason why it's included as a site allocation. It is in a fairly well-connected area, PTAL 4 in the town centre, and therefore we've obviously used those density assumptions, 260 dwellings per hectare, to determine the indicative development potential of the site coming forward. We've that then produces a sort of net residential unit of 16 with some gross employment floor space and main town centre floor space, 164 and 328 square metres respectively.
Seems to be sort of in the heart of the retail area. Is definitely potential there, isn't there, for ground floor retail use, I think.
Absolutely, yes.
Presumably the site being beyond 15 years is an indication of the fact it is in use. That have there been any discussions at all on this site?
No.
I know in terms of the housing requirement scenarios, we're looking potentially to include 16. And I am aware that some of these sites are just shown as beyond post 15-year period. How is the council proposing to look at the sites which are within that post 15-year period as to whether they would fall within the additional 16-year, if that's a route that we go down?
I think the majority of the sites within that post 15-year would actually come forward within years 39 to 40. I think the actual title of post 15 is a bit of a throwback to previous times, where we might have thought that some of the big schemes in the north of the borough might not come forward as quick. But I believe that all of those sites are actually now catered for within the 15 years. So I think it's more just a case that it probably shouldn't say post 15 years, it should probably just say 39 to 40. I can double check when I make the final checks on these sites, but I do believe that I think virtually all of those can come forward in that year.
I think it might be worth just a quick review of those sites that fall within the post 15-year period to see how much of those sites may come forward in that 16-year period, because obviously there are some much longer term projects, particularly in the south as well. But it's more of a discussion for tomorrow, but just to flag that up while it's in my mind.
Yeah, I think absolutely with those larger sites. I think it's more difficult with these smaller sites, and I think Mantle Road is a good example that through the plan preparation period we had no discussions with the landowner, and then all of a sudden we get pre-application and very quickly followed by an application, and they're intending to be on site fairly rapidly. And that is the nature of these kind of smaller sites, that they can effectively come away very quickly. So it's quite difficult for us to sort of predict, but I appreciate, we might need to do a little bit more work on those kind of post 15-year.
Any particular constraints that might prevent the site coming forward?
None that we're aware of, no.
In terms of viability, it's in quite a prime location there, isn't it?
Yeah, so we've looked at it in terms of small mixed-use site typology 10. We don't see any reason why it shouldn't be a viable site, given its location and given the land values, sales values within that area.
Okay, thank you. And no further questions on that site. If we can move on to LWA, any modifications? My colleague has just reminded me.
There are no modifications.
Thank you. So yes, if we can move on to land at Sydenham Road and Loxley Close, please. And if the council would just start off by just giving a little bit of background. Thank you.
Yes, so the site itself was identified through the London SLA as contributing to, potentially contributing to the housing supply. Obviously, it's in or has a number of uses on the site, some of which we'd essentially want to retain. Some of the buildings we'd want to keep, but a significant proportion of the site is occupied by a car centre and then car parking behind with some employment uses, which we feel could be rationalised and redeveloped. And as I said before, there is 3 sites within this kind of nodal point within the high street, which we think can complement one another in terms of sensitive intensification. So we've looked at the density assumption in terms of mathematical calculation. It's in the town centre, as good public transport, PTEL 4, and then applied that to the site with 70% residential, 10% employment, and 20% main town centre uses. Which results in 157 net residential units, just over 1,500 square metres of employment floor space and 3,000 town centre floor space. My understanding is that there hasn't been any direct conversations with the landowners as of yet on this site. And we have located it within the end of the plan period, albeit it's not post 15 as per the previous ones. And just to say, obviously we're responding to the London Plan policy H1, which talks about other low density commercial uses being appropriate to identify through local plans. as I said, there's a number of high street buildings that we want to retain, and there's also the pub and the beer garden behind the Dolphin as well, which is a rather nice beer garden. So we definitely want those uses retained as part of a kind of wider.
You're
building
talking
site.
about the same site. Have you gone on to the next site?
Have I gone on to the oh, apologies. Oh.
Trying to